Hello, my name is David Douglas. Today I'm starting a YouTube channel entitled The Douglas Family History. My name is David Douglas. I was born and raised in a little town in South Georgia called Waycross, which is in the county of Ware County. And today we're going to be beginning as far as a series of videos, and the first one we're going to entitle The Douglas Family of the Okefenokee Swamp. Waycross, like I said, which is located in Ware County, is sort of at what we call maybe the headwaters or the edge of the Okefenokee Swamp, which I believe is one of the largest blackwater swamps in the United States of America. But today we're going to be dealing with the family that settled there sometimes right before the Civil War. Land was purchased, and then not too long after the Civil War ended, they ended up moving from Wayne County, Georgia, into Ware County. In fact, right there, almost, I would say, in the middle of the Okefenokee Swamp. And the patriarch of this certain Douglas family, which is my family, the certain patriarch that I want to talk about today is a man named Burl Douglas. He was born about 1825, and at that time it was Appleton County, which is actually, that location and that land is in present-day Bacon County. He is the son of Seaborn Douglas, and his mother's last name was Yates. And at this time, I do not have as far as her first name, but I believe with all the records that Burl Yates was her father. So Burl Douglas was the son of Seaborn Douglas, and whatever her first name is, last name was Yates. He married a young lady named Mary Ann Strickland. She was the daughter of James A. Strickland and Lavina Harper of Wayne County. But they married in the year 1843. And this was located in Lowndes County, Georgia, which is present day, according to a lot of my records, is present day Eccles County. And at that time, her father, James Strickland, and Burl's father was on the 1840 census, and I believe that that's where they sort of hooked up. So they had 8 children together, and the oldest son was James R. Douglas, who was born in Georgia, possibly there in Lowndes County at that time. And then he had a daughter, and then James was born about 1844. Then he had a daughter named Nancy Isabella, who was born about 1846 in the same location, Lowndes County. Then they moved from Hamilton County, Florida. They had moved into Hamilton County, Florida, and we may talk about that a little bit later. And he had a son that was born there named William Douglas, who was born about 1851. Then he had a son named Henry Douglas, born approximately 1852. And when you look at his tombstone, the family has his age as far as the year 1842, but I believe that that is just an error because, of not having the proper record keeping back then. Then he had a daughter named Martha Jane Douglas, born about 1856. Then he had, who would be my great-grandfather, Seaborn Douglas, who was named after his grandfather. He was born 1859. Then he had a daughter named Mary Ann Douglas, who was named after her mother, born about 1863. Then he had a son, the last child that was born to him and Mary Ann, named Burl Douglas Jr., who was born 1865. Burl Douglas Sr. made his move about 1862, and when he bought land in Ware County, Georgia, in the Okefenokee Swamp. Because he shows up owning land in Ware County on the 1862 Tax Digest record, but still at this point he was living in the area of Doctortown, which is in Wayne County. So the land that he purchased in Waycross about 1862 was in the land district of the 8th district of Ware County, and it was land lot number 443. After the Civil War, he moved his family to Ware County. And I want to kind of pause here. I'm going to be looking back into the camera and into my notes, because there is no way that I can remember all this by memory. So just kind of bear with me if you would. But after the Civil War, Burrell moved his family to Ware County and settled in the Okefenokee Swamp, as I said, on land lot 443, which was in the 8th district. And it was almost right, like I said, there in the Okefenokee Swamp. And we're talking about the Douglas family of the Okefenokee Swamp. This land had approximately 490 acres. He would own 2 more lots of land in the 8th district of Ware County. And one land lot was 399 acres it was land lot number 399, consisting of 490 acres. Then he had land lot, if I remember right, was land lot 351, which also had approximately 490 acres. There in the swamp, and this was according to his estate records, he raised Brahma bulls, harvested honey from honeybees, he farmed, and they did what you call turpentine farming. You will find Burrell Douglas and his family on the 1870 and 1880 Ware County census. His wife, Mary Ann, would die at a young age, at the age of 39. This record would be on the 1870 Ware County mortality census record. And it shows that she died July 1869. This record, as you see, was dated June 1870, but it had the month of her death, which was July, and so it was that following, or that past year. So she died July, don't know the exact day, but in the month of July 1869. Burrell would then marry a young lady who was in his household named Nancy Carter, and she had a son, a young son, named William Carter. And she shows up on the 1870 Ware County census, so approximately at that time, and it probably was they could have been in love, that short of time, but it might have been a marriage of convenience. A lot of that, took place. Here he was, and he was still, I say, kind of, young, somewhere maybe in his late 40s. So, he needed a wife, to raise, all those children that he had. So the 1870 census said that Nancy Carter was only 19 years old. And he was 45. Like I told you, he was still kind of a young man. But Burrell Douglas and Nancy Carter, after they got married, never had no children of their own. So I believe I will explain that a little bit later, why I believe that Burrell never had no more children after Burrell Jr. From 1865 to 1869, him and Mary Ann Strickland never did have any more children, and that was following the Civil War. But I'm going to try to kind of explain that and kind of, use my imagination and a record that I found. His children would grow up there and be raised, in the Okefenokee Swamp. And James R. Douglas married Emily Jane Eunice, the daughter of Alexander Eunice. His other daughter would marry a man named Moses Manning in 1860 in Ware County. And I believe that he died during the Civil War. So sometimes after that, after the Civil War and before the 1880 Lowndes County census, she married somebody with the last name of Dowles because she was mentioned as Nancy Dowles on the Lowndes County census right next door to Alexander Eunice. So after Alexander Eunice's wife died, he married Nancy. So then William, his other son, William Douglas, married a lady named Rhoda Carter Lee approximately in 1873. Now, a lot of the marriage records were lost from 1873 on back. You can find them around 1874, but the courthouse burned there in Ware County. So evidently she married this Dowles man according to some of the children's birth, somewhere approximately 1873. Then Henry Douglas married a young lady named Polly Ann Strickland. Martha Jane Douglas, the next daughter, married Berrien A. Godwin. Then my great-grandfather, Seaburn Douglas, married Rebecca Lane. Mary Ann would go on and marry a young man named William A. Barber, who was none other than the son of Obadiah Barber. People there in Waycross and Ware County pretty well know about Obadiah Barber. They call him the king of the Okefenokee swamp. He was the one that the legend says that he killed a bear with a stump. So then Burrell Jr. would marry a young lady named Minnie Newton. But then tragedy would hit this family real early when one day his son William Douglas was riding a steam engine train, and the date of this was June the 29th, 1874. I found a newspaper article about this. And the newspaper article said that William was riding the steam engine train to a sawmill that was owned by J. McDonough. Now, whether he worked at this sawmill, I do not know. The steam engine overheated, according to the article, and blew the train up, killing William Douglas, the engineer, and the engineer's fireman that was on board. The article said that they found William 50 yards from the rear of the train in a sitting position, bruised and badly scalded, and evidently he was dead at the scene of this tragic accident. They found the engineer's fireman 50 yards from the train dead. Then they found the engineer of the train 250 yards from this train. All three was tragically killed. At that time, that little town was called Tebowville. And it actually started in a location way across as far as the city, in a community called the 009 area. It was just kind of a nickname. And Tebowville is located out there, and they say that there is a little monument that'll state that this is where Waycross actually started. And then Waycross was actually named that year, 1874, because I remember as a young man when the centennial celebration of Waycross took place in 1974. You see this gray goatee? My father grew one too, because if you were seen in Waycross, and this was a little thing that they had, and if you didn't have a beard or some goatee like this, they would lock you up sort of in a makeshift jail. So my father grew one, and I remember him putting dye on it. I don't know, probably I'm his age as far as what he was then. But William Douglas, amen, in this tragic accident left behind his wife Rhoda and a little daughter named Mary, who they would nickname Molly. James R. and Emily Jane Eunice had 3 daughters. I'm going to tell you about Burl's grandchildren now. How did his children married right there in Ware County? James R. and Emily Jane Eunice had 3 daughters. Mary Ann, who was born approximately 1876. When I give you these dates, these are approximate dates according to census records and according to even tombstone inscriptions. So their daughter Mary Ann was born 1876. Viney was born 1878, and Margaret, who they called Maggie, was born around 79. Then Nancy Isabella Douglas, like I said, had that daughter in 1870 named Mary Ann. Now, I don't know who the father of this daughter is. I just don't know. Then she had children by the Dowles man named Martin, who was born 1872, Burl, who was born 1875, Henry, that was born 1877, Julia, who was born 1879. So they were born to the Dowles man. After that, she married Alexander Eunice, and then those children took on the Eunice name. So you can find them, like I said, on the 1880 census. Nancy Dowles at that time, who was a Douglas, was next door to Alexander Eunice. Then they raised their children till the date of when Nancy and Alexander died in a county called Sylvester, Georgia. And that's where Nancy and Alexander are buried actually out from Sylvester, Georgia, in Worth County. Henry Douglas and Polly Ann Strickland, their children was Viney, who was born 1876, Rosa, who was born 1877, Julia, who was born 1880, Mary Elizabeth, born 1883, William Burl, born 1884, Sarah Jane, born 1886, James Henry, born 1888, and Ella Lee, born 1891. It looks like Henry and Polly had the largest family of these children. Martha Jane would marry Barry Ann Godwin, or it might have been sort of a race here. Mary Ann had a lot of children too, or Martha Jane, excuse me. Her and Barry Ann Godwin, Barry A. Godwin, had children, and their names was Mary Ann, born 1877, Margaret, born 1880, William Burl, born 1882, Seaburn R., born 1885, Barry A., born 1890, Missouri, born 1892, Simon L., born 1894, and Dorothy, born 1896, Joseph, born 1899. Then Seaburn Douglas and Rebecca Lane had these children. Elizabeth, who they called Lizzie, born 1883. William Riley, who I believe was named after the patriarch of this family. His brother was named William Riley. So Seaburn had a son named William Riley, and they called him Riley, born 1884. Then John A., who was my grandfather. My father, who was Silas Douglas, this was his father. And he was born January 1894. But then when Seaburn and Rebecca, they divorced, because the Waycross Weekly Herald said that Seaburn Douglas and Rebecca Douglas filed for divorce in April 21st, 1894. It looked like almost after John A. was born, they divorced. We don't know the reason. So it was filed April the 21st, 1894. Their son, John A. Douglas, was about 4 months at the time of this divorce old, and then had the other little children. My father, who was Silas Douglas, told me that Rebecca just up and left and moved way yonder somewhere. And I haven't found no record of her after her father's estate was actually settled. Her name, Rebecca Douglas, is on that. But after that, I do not find any record of Rebekah's death or even marriage. So I don't know where she got off to. So Sebern had to raise these 3 children, actually with the help of his family. My grandfather, John A., they called him Little John because there was 2 John. You had one that was even Henry's son named John Henry, I believe it was, or John Matthew. He was Big John. My grandfather, I never saw him. He died about 1934. He was called Little John. So Little John was actually on the 1900 or either 1910 census in the household of his uncle Burl and Minnie Newton, that was Burl's wife. So I haven't found out as far as where Rebekah ended up. Now Sebern, he's buried in the Mount Pleasant Cemetery that is actually located behind as far as Satilla Square Mall. Between Satilla Square Mall and Central Avenue, there's a little church and a little cemetery there called Mount Pleasant. And he's buried in an unmarked grave. My father pointed it out to me. He said, that's where my grandfather Sebern was buried. And I believe that there's others buried there, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Then Mary Ann, who married William A. Barber, who was the son of Obadiah Barber. They had children, one named Moses, born 1881. William R., that name's real popular, born 1882. Julia M., born 1884. Albert C., born 1886. Everett Obadiah, born 1887. Albert, born 1886. Mary E., born 1889. Jesse J., born 1891. Claude, born 1894. And Hardy S., born 1896. Now, Burl Jr. and Minnie Newton had no children together. Now, I know later after Burl died, she married and she had children because I talked with her grandson one time about the family. And he was an elderly man too. But Burl Douglas Sr., the patriarch of this family, died September the 8th, 1884. I found the estate records that told the date that he died. James R. and Henry, his 2 sons, became executor of his estate. The estate came to a total of $1,645, and that was in 1884. After paying off all his debts, it was divided up amongst his children and also William, the one that died tragically on that train accident. Even a portion of it went to William's daughter, Mary Ann, one they called Molly Douglas. This family would eventually move out into the area outside of Waycross, Georgia, in a community of Brantley County. At that time, in those years, it was called Pierce County. But then when Brantley County was formed, it fell into Brantley County. And that's the land and those homes was out Central Avenue Extension, just beyond what they call Pleasant Valley Church. I've seen even Henry's, not as actually the actual house, but the actual location where Henry actually had his home. And then right there, back of it is where the rest of them had their land. So there are some family stories that I want to tell you, and some of them are hilarious. One of them was handed down by Henry Douglas, one of Burl's sons. And this was about Henry Douglas, one of Burl's sons. He had a physical condition. Now, I know this one ain't hilarious, but I'm going to tell one later, a couple of them that's real hilarious. Henry Douglas had this physical condition where he sweated blood. And you could find this even in a book in Ware County about the Okefenokee Swamp. This story was actually put in there by Henry's granddaughter, Nell Easterling Boeing. And this physical condition where he sweated blood, sometimes they would find him in the fields and even in the woods, sitting down, so weak, passed out, sitting in a pool of blood. so weak from this condition, he could not move, but they would find him. They would hear the dogs howling that would follow him out there, a lot of his hunting dogs. He was known as the man who sweated blood. A lot of people didn't believe it, but there was a lot of time he could feel these attacks coming on. And he would take out his handkerchief, white handkerchief, and wipe his brow, and there would be pink perspiration, sweat. Let me just say it like that. There would be pink sweat that would appear on his handkerchief. So I talked to Nell Easterling. I heard my father, Nell Easterling Boyd. I talked to her one day. She even showed me one of Henry Douglas's guns that he had nicknamed Old Rabbit Ear. That day, Nell gave me my great-grandfather's picture, who was Seaborn Douglas. When I stepped to her door, knocked on it, I never saw Nell before as far as in my life, and I believe that she was even my wife's librarian there in one of the Brantley County schools. So when I knocked at the door and I told Nell that I was just trying to find out, some history, about the Douglases, and she looked at me. I had more hair then, and it was jet black. She looked at me, said, "You look like a Douglas. Just come on in." So she invited me in. She showed me a lot of other pictures, wedding pictures of her father, one of James Henry's sons, where they got married. So she also verified that Henry did have these attacks and all where he sweated blood. He did not die from that, from all that, losing of that blood. It could have been something with the platelet levels in his body. We don't know. I mean, he didn't go to no doctor. He didn't believe in it. They wanted him to go get an examination, but Henry defied the doctors and everybody else's advice. But he did not die of that condition. He died of typhoid fever in 1936. Another one of the family stories that was handed down to me was told by my daddy about my great uncle Burl Douglas and another man named John Driggers. You can even find this story, and it was kind of in the late 1800s in the Savannah, one of the Savannah newspapers. They even posted this. Men were gathering up because Burl and John Driggers sort of had some issues. They had it out for one another, and they were going to fight. So they all met up at a location called the High Bluff Primitive Baptist Church and Cemetery in the area of Slaughterville, which is present-day Brantley County. All the men gathered up. They wanted to see a good fight. And these men was actually all around, just bragging, who was the baddest man. Which one of them, had the blackest and most, evil heart, so to speak. They wanted to be sort of, you might as well say, the rooster of the bunch. Now, it was told that Burl Jr., who was going to fight John Driggers, pushed his way through the crowd of men, got in the middle of that circle, stood there and said, as he jumped up in the middle of the air, as he clicked his feet together 3 times, and he crowed like a rooster, and he shouted this out, "My heart is blacker than any of y'all men." So both of these men fought, and my father said that they fought to a draw. Now the Savannah newspaper said that John Driggers claimed to be, as far as the rooster of that fight. So, but my father said, and it might have been because, he was the Douglas, that they fought to a draw, turned around, he said, and washed in the same wash basin of water and walked off friends after that. So, one more story about Burl, and he was on up in age at this time, living out the area of what we call Central Avenue Extension, which is present-day Brantley County. Now, Burl Jr. was actually a moonshiner, made moonshine. So he was making moonshine, and so the area law got word about it, and they went to Burl's house, and they said the sheriff at that time knocked on the door and had his deputy with him. His wife, Minnie, answered the door. She went back to the backyard where Burl was at, and Burl said, tell him I ain't got no time to go meet him. Said, tell him to come around back. So the sheriff and his deputy, Daddy said, went back to where Burl was at. They began to talk. And Burl asked him, said, do you want a sample, of the moonshine? So these two law officers, they said, and according to my daddy, now whether there's any truth in this or not, it's kind of hilarious, said it took the sheriff and his deputy 3 days to get back to the county courthouse. I'm going to tell you where all that county courthouse is at and what county that the sheriff was part of then, because a lot of these boundaries change, so you're not going to know. Now, getting back, now I don't think Burl Jr. was ever arrested. Now, my daddy said one time they did have to put him in jail because he started having like dementia, started, seeing things, in imaginations, and I reckon his mind sort of was going on him. And they ended up putting him in there because at that time, they didn't have no far as mental hospital. They put him there for his own protection for a little while, and I heard that story. Now, getting back to Burl Douglas Sr., the patriarch of this family, after he died September the 8th, 1884, his widow, Nancy, she would file for a Confederate pension. Now, he did fight in the Civil War. We'll talk more about that and that situation that he ended up in. She filed for a Confederate pension in 1913. On this application was a sworn affidavit by a man named David Cason. And he swore to this that Burl died as a result of injuries sustained during the Civil War. David Cason fought in the same unit that Burl did. So, I don't know what the injury actually was, and this could even play in, which I'm just sort of reading between the lines, why he did not have no more children after Burl Jr. actually was born in 1865. So, but the application does not say the date, the time, or the place that Burl possibly got injured, but it took him 20 years to die. I mean, it possibly could be. This man swore to it, that he died as a result of injuries sustained during the Civil War. But I know, according to the records that I have, that he was in Savannah at the time that Sherman marched in, where he was at. And I know that after the war, Mary Ann had Burl Jr. in 1865, who was conceived after Burl Sr., and this is what happened. He went AWOL. He deserted his unit, which was at Camp Lee, which is in Bryan County. That's where he was at, in the place called Way Station. So, and they had the trial of his court-martial, and he was put up, to be shot by a firing squad. But yet, we'll talk about that as far as even in our next video, how that he was pardoned and actually restored back to duty. So, but like I said, after this, it don't look like that Burl was able to have any more children. Now, the second wife that he married, she was young enough to have more children. She had already had one, William Carter, but yet her and Burl never did have any more children. So I don't know if some way the war messed him up. Now, when he deserted in around, I believe it was 1863, he stayed gone for about a year. So it looks like somewhere around 1864, after he had got back, after he deserted and got back with his wife, she ended up, conceiving as far as a child, and then he was born January of 1865. But after that, there wasn't no more children. So I don't know what happened to Burl after that he was released from the Okefenokee barracks, which was that prison. Him and 23 other men, they were restored back to duty. And Sherman got there about that time, and I imagine he got in for some, some skirmishes, some little battles as they were forced out of Savannah there in that time on over into South Carolina. But after this, I do not have any more even military records, about Burl. He probably fought as an irregular, and a lot of those records probably got destroyed there in Savannah because it was a big Confederate military base during the Civil War. Now, you may say, how do you fit in to this family? But let me tell you, like I said, my father was Silas Douglas. My mother was Gladys Walker. They were married, and I was born to them, and I had one adopted brother named Gary Douglas. My father had two previous marriages. One was a lady named Nadine Smith. They never did have any other children. And then his first wife was actually Essie Mae Stinson. That was my father's first wife. They married around, 1936 in Marion County, Florida. They had actually 4 children that actually was born. And I know there was a miscarriage that my daddy told me about. And it was a little boy. They never named him. But then he had a little girl named Joanne. She died a month after she was born from pneumonia. And then they had a daughter named Shirley Ann, who finally, married a Newman, and she's alive today. Then the next son was Harvey Jean, and he married Polly Hess, and they had children. And then there was Joseph Henry, and he married, and he had children. And I have just recently, just prior to making this video, has spoke to who I know as Jay. They called his birth name was Joseph Henry, but they always called him Jay. I spoke to Jay's son and grandson the other day over the phone concerning family history. So, but I was the last son born to Silas Douglas. And his father, like I said, was John A. Douglas, and his mother was Rosa Conley. Her father was Charles Conley, and her mother was Samantha Griffin. Charles Conley's father came over from Ireland in 1840, and his name was John B. Conley. And he settled also in the Okefenokee Swamp. Right there off of US 1 going into the Okefenokee Swamp Park entrance on the left, not too far down that road, John B. Conley, Charles Conley, Rosa Conley's grandfather purchased land there. And I believe it was in the 9th District, and it was Camden County, Charlton County, and then into the edge of Ware County just for a little while. So it was land lot 15. But let me get away, the Conley family, and I'm proud to have even some Irish blood as far as in me. So I was born to my father and my mother in Waycross. So I am connected with this certain family. In the area, like I said, called the Okefenokee Swamp. You don't have to go very far outside of Waycross till you're in the Okefenokee Swamp. So, but I'm going to continue these videos on my YouTube channel that I'm going to be calling the Douglas Family History YouTube channel. So if you would, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Give us a thumbs up. Make some comments. I'm going to leave our comments open. I do have a website, and maybe I'll be telling you about it and have as far as the website, name, but it's called, to give you, I reckon y'all know you call it the call letters that's at the top of, your screen there when you get on the internet. But one of them is entitled Family Resemblance, the Douglas family of the Okefenokee Swamp, and I put a lot of pictures in there of this certain family. Then I got one called Dark Stream. the Douglas Family Story. Both of these websites, and I also got the Conleys on there too. The Conley family of Cork County, Ireland. All these websites are on Wixsite. That's WIXSIT.com. So Dark Stream, the Douglas Family Story. And I believe I have it under Silas Douglas 4058 Dark Stream at Wixsite.com. I know that's a lot, but I'll try to get it and maybe put it up on a little card to let you see it. So thank you for listening to us today, and I hope that maybe this will help you. You don't see much. You see some, but you don't see much about, family history. A lot of times you see it in books. You see it, on these ancestry, genealogical family history type websites, but thought that I would just do a video to talk to you about, my family, and hopefully, I may pick up some people that is connected. But the next video that we do on this journey that I'm going to take us on, the next video will be entitled The Douglas Family in Georgia. When they came into Georgia during the colonial period, right before the Revolutionary War started. So we thank you for listening in. Like I said, please subscribe. This will help us out. Give us a thumbs up. Make a comment. Go to my other websites, and also have, as far as my family tree, also on Ancestry.com. And I've also done, as far as even a DNA test, I've done a Y-DNA test. I've had people to even purchase those for me, and I really appreciate that a whole lot. So, till we meet again here on the Douglas Family History YouTube channel.